and presented for approval to senior management. And this is a very, very singular thing and a very great responsibility. In the 4 years that I worked on the committee right before retirement and that I was the president of the committee, we had to deal with many, many issues related both from, day-to-day issues to things related to the premiums and things related to the actual structure of how the plan services were being provided. I think the first thing about the first challenges that the plan has right now is, as Sylvia said, the issue of the premiums and the issue of the financial sustainability. I think one of the problems that the plan has had over the years is this boom or bust thing where we have premiums, we produce a surplus, we produce a certain amount of balance, and then for several years the premiums are not adjusted. When I came into the plan about at the end of 2006, the plan was essentially down to 1 month of returns. We had not adjusted the premiums for 2 or 3 years. The premiums were not covering, and we were about to go into a deficit. We had to raise the premiums at that point 18%. The point that I made after that was, look, we have to have a continuous increase in the premiums and a continuing monitoring of what our problems are, so we do not find ourselves in the position that we now find ourselves again 4 years later, 5 years later, 6 years later, where for the last 3 years we had a deficit. We had to increase 14% last year. Apparently we will have to increase another significant amount this year. The way that the premium adjustment has been made has been really insufficient and has been inadequate. The World Bank raises premiums every year according to the organizational salary increase or the cost of living adjustment, and so does in fact the fund. And that is something we have to actually try to see whether we can smooth this. These jumps every 3 or 4 years of 14-15% are really create a lot of disturbance and a lot of noise to our members. I think in looking at the premiums, I think going forward, again, taking one of the things that Sylvia said, is we need to look with a great deal of what are the drivers of this problem. These things that, that the report, and if Sylvia had, I think Sylvia said she was disgusted by the report. I myself, when I read a draft of the report, sent about 10 pages of comments. This business of blaming us for being old, sick, decrepit, et cetera, was really unacceptable, this hostility towards. And I thought that a lot of the appreciations that were included in the report were disingenuous. We as retirees, in fact, paid for half of the report, paid for half of the cost of the plan, more or less. And the report kept saying we're overusing the resources of the plan, when in fact we are not overusing the resources of the plan. So I think looking at what are the drivers, looking at what are the incentives, looking at what to see whether the 2016 reforms that were introduced to the plan have been adequate is an important thing. I think the second, as Sylvia mentioned, the second thing that is important is to go when the new selection and adjudication process are put into place, is to look and participate very, very, very thoroughly. In the last bid, our representatives of the retirees was Isabel, the representatives of the staff were Anita Betancourt and Roberto. And I think they worked very, very hard to deal with some of the issues that were presented. But one of the main issues is that most of the providers come with their plan and try to sell whatever it is that they have on hand. They come with a cookie cutter, which in fact, we have a very special plan, which is a bespoke plan, which is designed to us. These are the things we chose to have. These are the things we chose to have. And one of the tensions in the selection procedure last year, the last time that it was done, is actually the fact that there was a lot of difficulty in getting into an agreement with the providers in terms of actually saying, yes, this is what we're going to do. This is what we have chosen as our plan. And I think two things should be put into the, two or three things are very important to put into the plan. One is to recognize that the plan is the administrator of a series of choices we have made as an institution, as the bank, in order to have a certain set of benefits. And I went to many meetings when I was the president of the committee with the representatives of Cigna, who would come and try to sell this idea or that idea. Oh, we can do this better this way, and generally trying to go away from what we had agreed would be what they would be implementing as administrators of the plan. So the primacy of the plan, what are the policies of the plan, I think should be the driving concern of the terms of reference and the driving concerns of the negotiation. I think there are two other things. One is transparency. Because of this issue of the plans, the administrators trying to bring their own plans or their own ideas about the plan, there is a lot of coming and going. I mean, I think that there have been several recently where Cigna apparently in one of its plans changed the pharmacy benefit and started rejecting the kind of level that we had and the kind of coverage that we have. I think that is something that has to be monitored, that's something that has to be built into very clearly into what our plan is. The second is ease of access. I think, looking at the page that Sylvia was referring to, there is, for the past 4 or 5 years, there have been an endless number of complaints about how difficult it is to get feedback from Cigna, how difficult it is to do some of these things. And I think, Cigna's a big organization, we're a relatively small plan that they administer. But I think that has to be built very clearly into the contract. I think the third thing that's important in that contract is that the information we have gotten from Cigna over the years has been very poor and has been really not tied to what our needs are. And they would report this, when in fact we would ask for this, and there was no regular reporting. And a lot of the work of the committee, a lot of the time that I spent on the committee was trying to make sure that Cigna would report on the things that we had asked and on the things that we had reported. Because I think one of the problems that I think is probably the next thing to solve is something that Sylvia has said, which is having technical people on the committee. But I think beyond having technical people on the committee, I think what is really, really important is for the bank, which is administering, which is in fact contracting this $70 million a year enterprise, to have staff that is capable of supervising and administering the plan. This is not just something that we need to bring as members of the committee. It is something that the bank has to build into its health management service. I was struck, I was in the committee at the same time that I was in the committee, in the investment committee of the pension fund. And I was always struck by the enormous and immense difference between the quality of information that would be produced by the bank's health unit in terms of the health insurance unit, and the amount of information and the quality of information that I would get from the investment unit of the pension fund, where they would the people working in the pension fund, the unit that is now managed by Sheppy, was actually brought very detailed information about the performance of each of the firms that were administering our resources. And there was early warning. These guys are not, whatever it is that we were expecting them in terms of return, they're not meeting their benchmark. So there was a continuous monitoring by technical staff within the bank's administration to find out exactly how this was being performed, how their contracts were being carried out, how their contracts are being performed. It's easier in a way because there are benchmarks for different types of investments. We have passive investments, and there are benchmarks and regarding the results that you expect from these. But there was nothing like this from our technical unit in the health insurance unit. In fact, a lot of the work that I'm sure Sylvia did, a lot of the work that I did, a lot of the work that the referees did when I was on the committee was actually saying, you need to get this, and we need to get this report, we need to get this information. And that information wasn't there. And a lot of the time, there was a lot of entropy related to how much and how long it would take to get this information. So I think one of the priorities for the committee is, in the next period, is to make sure that we have, in the health insurance section, the same quality of staff analysis and internalization of information that we have in the staff retirement plans investment office. I mean, it is a remarkable difference in the quality of information that was produced by one and in the quality of information that was produced by the other. I think the fourth point, and again, it's a point that Sylvia has raised very eloquently, is the quality of communication and the quality of information. By the time we get the report, and I realize that there is the auditing of the reports, but by the time we get the reports, it's usually a year or a year and a half. By the time we get the information about how the plan performed. I think the meeting that we just had was about how the plan performed in 2015. I think that has to stop, and that has to be made much more timely. The other thing is that it cannot be just one meeting every year. I think there has to be some sort of mechanism by which we communicate much more often with the staff, ask the staff and the retirees what are the priorities, have a lot more ongoing feedback than has been had. I know this is difficult. I think one of the points that Sylvia, Roberto, Anamita, and I, and the people who were in the committee at the time, is that we're doing this amongst many other things that we're doing. And so, but there is I think a major failure has been the inability to communicate and the inability to seek from staff what it is, and from retirees what it is that they're looking for and what their problems are, other than it just anecdotic basis. I think there is one more issue which is probably not as relevant to us, but I think is very relevant going forward, is that a lot of the problems that I think that the plan is experiencing has to do with some of the changes in the personnel policies, some of the changes that in the personnel policies of active members of the bank. My sense about that is when I represented the staff, I was very clear about that, and was, very often when people would be shipped into some sort of Siberia and they would, and they would do this or whatever, I would go very often to the manager of the Human Resources Department and say, look, this is unacceptable, this cannot be, this is having an impact. One of the many things was, from time to time, they would change the vesting period. At one point, when they decided to do a package, they lowered the vesting period to 3 years, which has an amazing impact on the cost to the plan. At some point later, and this I was only the head of the committee for 4 years, they raised it to about 10 years. And again, we said, okay, how is that consistent with the kinds of personnel policies that you're trying to do? So I think that there is, this is something that, whether it's Sylvia, whether it's me, whether it's Isabel, whoever it is, one has to raise gingerly, because we're gone, they pay us for not working, and we have to be deferent, but it is something that needs to be put on the table. That my sense at the time when I was in the committee was that a lot of the problems were being exported to the plan that in fact had to be looked at much more wholly in the context of the bank's personnel policies and what kinds of impact it had. I mean, I think, you know, as Sylvia announced, both of us have a tendency to talk too much. I think we had talked too much, so I think more important now is listening to your observations and questions and feedback for whatever job we get to do. Thank you.